Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Daily Six. I'm so glad you're joining me. I spend my time here in the car down at the city park with the Lord in the scriptures. I'm glad you're with me today. Let's see what God has to say to us. Take your Bibles, Acts chapter 20. Let's just read the first 16 verses. Acts 20, 1 through 16. Kind of a simple text. There's one little fun story in it. Let's see if God has anything to say to you and me in that. Listen to the Spirit, and then come on back and let's spend a few minutes with it. Acts chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. All right, so have you finished reading Acts chapter 20, verses 1 through 16? If you haven't, pause the video, let God say something to you, not me. Acts 21 through 16. All right, so in this whole series, we're asking the Lord, where do I fit in this story? What's going on in this narrative that might match my life or so forth? Well, all right, so there's one little piece of low-hanging fruit for me as you wonder about where you fit in the story, where I fit in the story. If you attend Mount Hope Church, where I teach on a regular basis, I imagine there's the opportunity here for a few jokes about a guy who preaches too long. And I do feel that every single Sunday. I think, man, I've been a little too long-winded. Some of you write me a note every now and then. Hey, Chris, stop worrying about it. We love. Okay, thank you. But at least I'm not as bad as this guy, right? Look at this. In verse 7, Paul was speaking to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, he kept on talking until midnight. So the next time you're looking at your watch in church and think, oh man, Chris is going long today, at least I'm not talking till midnight, right? Can you imagine that? Well, there were many lamps in the upstairs room where they were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. You can imagine this, can't you? You've been in these settings, have you not? Might not be at church. Maybe it is at church. Maybe that happened to you last week at church. I saw one of you fall asleep. But you've been in a context, a meeting somewhere. It's like, man alive, when is this person going to stop talking, right? It just goes on and on and on and on and on. Well, he fell sound asleep. Look at this. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the third story and was picked up dead. Wow. Like, this is a big deal, isn't it? Can you imagine, just pause in that moment and stop and think about, you're at a church gathering, a small group, it's a ministry gathering, maybe it's a worship night, it's so forth, and the preacher's going on so long that literally a guy falls out of the window and dies. The guy gets killed by how long Paul's sermon is, literally. I can imagine that there was a bit of an uproar in this church community, just the stunned nature of this event and so forth. Well, the Lord was faithful. Verse 10, Paul went down, he threw himself on the young man. I almost even wonder if in that there's this sense of Paul's own amazing level of grief, that he is shocked and stunned too, right? So Paul threw himself on the young man. He put his arms around him. Don't be alarmed, he said. He's alive. Raise the guy from the dead. He's alive. And then I love what happens, verse 11. Then he went upstairs again, broke bread and ate, and he kept on talking. After talking until daylight, when he left, and the people took the young man home alive, and they were greatly comforted. I mean, isn't this a fun story, right? It's like, wow, Paul preaches so long, the kid falls out the window, dead asleep, dies. Everybody's like just in absolute chaos. Paul runs downstairs, maybe in chaos too. Oh my gosh, and then Paul's like, oh, no, he's fine. He's alive. The Lord raised him from the dead is what happened. This supernatural miracle, right, that God did. And Paul had been used by God, many, many miracles. But then he goes back upstairs. They break bread. It's like, okay, let's have a quick meal. And then he just keeps on going all the way till morning. And it's not till morning that this poor kid Eutychus gets to go home, right? All right, so fun story, right? You see the hand of God in it and so forth. And you go, all right, well, where do I fit in that, all right? At least Eads isn't going to preach that long this Sunday, right? I might. Let's see. All right, here's what the Lord's showing to me. All fun aside, as I look at this and say, okay, where do we fit in this story? And it's this, and actually, it's kind of serious for me in this. The Lord revealing this to me. Our American culture And all through our culture, we're very, very time oriented. Everything's got to happen, within, a business meeting at work. If it's longer than 45 minutes, our heads are exploding. If church service runs more than an hour and 15, boy, if we get to an hour and 30, people are getting uncomfortable, so forth. But there are many parts of the world that people move a lot slower. They're not so driven. The space of relationship is important. That's where they're going to sit and dwell, and they're just glad to be with one another. And especially when it comes to the gospel, other parts of the world, when the believers get together, maybe it's in a persecuted church setting or so forth, when they get together, they are hungry for God. I remember reading the story here in the story. I actually saw a guy speak about this, that he was a Pacific Islander by his ethnicity, and he'd gone over into somewhere in Western Asia to speak the gospel, but he was an American, and he had been invited over there. He preached the gospel, and in about 30 minutes, he wrapped up, and people looked at him and said, you're done? Like, aren't you going to have more? And as he found out, they were looking for 2 or 3 or 4 hours of him teaching. And friends, that's not American culture. So here's what I want to do. The video is going to end here in about 30 seconds because we're time conscious. We're going to keep this inside 6-7 minutes. Would you give God 6 more minutes? Now stop and think about it. Will you give God 6 more minutes? Eutychus and this gang gave God all day and night at his own peril. Can you give God 6 more minutes and spend time with him? All right, video's going to end. Can you do it? We'll see you tomorrow on the Daily 6.